everybody, and welcome to a special Web of Wyrd Libra Equinox edition. This is number 33, and myself and the bro are here to chat about what's going on in our world right now. So how are you doing, Pete?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, bro. I here in the UK, I've got my head down at the moment because I'm trying to write a book, and I've got a deadline to do it by. And it's I tried to write it in Greece. It didn't really work because the beach was just a bit too tempting, and and all you really want to do is I don't know, eat, drink, lie around the place, which is what we did in the end. So my publisher very graciously gave me another couple of months to finish, which I was really grateful for. But I have had my head down, and so I've missed a lot of stuff. I'm really just trying to catch up on it now. Some of the stuff we're going to be talking about has sort of kind of impacted on my attention and awareness and point from time to time, but I think I'm not quite as up with it as I usually am,
Well,
which
not
may
to
be a good
worry.
thing.
Yeah, it probably is a good thing, to be fair. And we are just going to preface today's call with the need to be extra cautious about what we're going to talk about, because we are now in a world where everything is a little bit more under scrutiny than perhaps we would like in terms of the freedom of speech. And we do have to be careful. But we're going to try and tackle a few difficult issues, particularly some of them that have been in the news this week that have been super divisive. So we're going to try and tackle them with our usual sidelong look and a little bit of banter. But I do just want to continue your theme there about your book, but also why is it that we all seem to convince ourselves that we can go on a holiday and take our work with us and believe that we're going to sit and write tomes or catch up on emails? I've done the same thing many times, and I've never yet done any real work when I've been on holiday. So where would you like to start with that, dude?
Well, I have to say that I've done quite well then, because I did make good progress when it came down
Oh,
to
wow.
it. I mean, it was only after about a week or so of pretty much being buried in my laptop that I eventually surfaced and thought, this is rubbish. I really need to be out in the sunshine. And so at that point I emailed my publisher and said, you know, actually, this is not going to happen. Sorry. But interestingly, after that, having been freed up, because I was really grinding at it, it really wasn't working well. Having been freed up with knowledge that I didn't actually have to do it, I ended up doing quite a lot because I do enjoy writing. And I think the book that I'm writing at the moment is super interesting. And I'm really, really excited about it. Actually, I don't know whether anybody else will like it really, but a couple of people who've had a quick read of it seem to think it's quite good. So so I'm quite committed to it. It is something that I like doing, and it's a kind of a way of bringing my thoughts together on certain topics, and particularly professional issues to me. It's about iridology. It's about something I'm calling, actually, I don't know whether I should say this because I don't really want to let the title out, but it is about um an approach to reading the iris that is more about should we say the soul. It's more about the sort of non-physical aspects of our existence, which I think is very, very interesting, and has actually been very popular when I've recent events that I've attended, including of course the notorious Glastonbury, which we reported from just a while back.
Right. Well, I mean, you've absolutely blown my theory sky high, bro. So good for you. But bearing in mind, I think you were in Greece for about a month or something. It
Yeah,
seemed like a month anyway. So perhaps some part of your conscience
it's just
decided
over
to get the
three
work out of the
weeks.
way
Yeah,
first.
yeah.
But good for you, dude. I mean, you've been telling me about your upcoming publishing works for a little while, so hopefully we'll be able to give those more of a plug as they come online. But I'm also hearing that your fan club in Britain continues unabated. So good for you on that one too. And it's nice to know that our audience out there is still getting a lot of value from these podcasts that we put out, somewhat randomly, but roughly every 6 weeks or so, I think it seems. The eyes are an important part of us really, but also they give us the ability to look and see, sometimes in the 3D sense, sometimes in the 4D. And right now I suggest that we need all of our senses to make sense of what the hell is going on in our world, because it seems like it's rapidly unraveling pretty much wherever you care to look. And if we're looking at the TV, which is probably a waste of time these days, we can see a whole bunch of narratives being presented, most of which aren't really worth giving any time to. But which ones have been catching your eye, bro, on this special Equinox edition that we're doing today on September the 23rd, 2023. So lots of twos and threes going on today. But yeah, where would you like to start?
Well, I think we have to start with my mate Rishi Sunk, and just to
Rashid
explain that.
Sunook,
Rashid Sunook, but I'm calling him Rishi Sunk now because of it came about because of a correspondence that I was having. It's probably on a Facebook thread, if I'm honest. But the guy referred to him as Rishi Sunk, and I thought, what's that? And then I realized he just left the A out. And I thought it was so brilliant because actually, by the looks of it, I think he is pretty much sunk. I can see him on the way out. I can see the next one on the way in. I don't know how long it is technically or constitutionally before we have another general election, but I think things are being shifted in the background so that we are now being encouraged to look in another direction. More of that in a bit. But in particular, I think he sunk himself a little bit. And again, this is really two-edged. In his apparent rowback on net zero carbon emissions, because he has decided that the poor people of Britain would not really welcome any more limitations or any more price rises on account of the climate change budgetary impact. So he has decided to knock back the date at which the sale of fossil fuel powered vehicles will be banned. I don't exactly know what the date is actually, but I know it's set to be 2030, and I think it's gone back to 2035 or something like that. And of course, all the environmentalists are absolutely in outrage about it. They're all sort of screaming that he's going to, hasten the global boiling situation that we've talked about a few times. And what on earth is he doing? And he's got no credibility at all. And the interesting thing about it, of course, is that commentators that I actually quite like Jonathan Pye, for example, I mean, I love what he does, but he's often on the wrong side of things as far as I can see. And on this one, I think, because nobody can challenge the climate change narrative. And yet it seems to me that if Sunk has done this, he's sort of subtly signaling to us, or perhaps not so subtly, that the whole thing is bullshit. Because otherwise, if it really was serious, why would he do that? And I think he's also signed his own political death warrant in doing it, or maybe another chapter of it, because, at the moment, the climate change lobby is so rabid that it's very difficult to imagine how anybody could survive doing what he's just done. So maybe you can comment on that, and then I'll come up with the next thing, which involves his opposite number.
Right. Yeah. Well, look, I mean, first of all, just humorously, something has come to my mind as you were referring to Climate, which is an old advert for a spread that you either like or don't like. So the advert used to be My Mate Marmite. Yes. And wondering whether Mr. Sunk and all of these changes are sort of a bit of a Marmite situation. Either you love the whole agenda or you loathe it. And I'm thinking that, what you just said really to me sums up the lunacy of much of what we're seeing on the television. It's a bit like some of the offered medications. Apparently, they're going to be rolled out again, despite the fact that there's enough material out there to convince everybody that these things really are not good for you. They're going to be rolled out again. I think they are being rolled out again with boosters. And it seems that
I've already been offered it.
Right, yes, you told me that, exactly. And despite the fact that there is a litany of information, possibly even a litany of court cases and a whole bunch of other stuff that is very much available right now that has completely discredited the whole process. And it's a bit like watching the news over here in the US and seeing the current administration swanning around despite the fact that they're all absolutely up to their eyeballs in corruption with enough paperwork to prove it, and yet nobody's going to court or going to prison. Which is also a big theme of this week when we look at some of the other celebrities that have been in the news who seem to be acting with a relative amount of impunity, considering some of the things that they've even personally claimed online themselves. And we're going to have a humorous piece a little bit later, I think, called "What Brand Are You? Are you this brand or that brand? And how is your brand presenting itself to the world?" Now, without mentioning any names, I think we can all probably clock what that means.
Well, branding is super important.
I think it's super important too. And I think that there are many delicate conversations that we are going to have to try and navigate through this podcast without getting ourselves in trouble or upsetting too many people. But I think that there are a lot of very obvious things being basically displayed in front of us that seem to be very easily sidestepped. I think really with the use of a lot of magic and spelling, look into my eyes, you're under kind of a touch. And I think that this is another one. So how is it that we're being told that we're in this my mate Marmite situation with the global environment and everything else, and yet we've got Mr. Sunk, our friend Mr. Sanook, basically rowing back on anything to do really that would resolve that issue. And of course, you know, the other thing that's interesting, I'm currently in Texas where Mr. Musketeer, our friend, has got the Tesla sort of a center very much under construction, huge construction going on here. It's very much part of Austin's remit, which is close to where we are. And I'm like, well, you know, we're being told to switch over to electric cars and hybrids because they're meant to be more environmentally friendly. And the truth is, of course, they're using pretty much the same resources as the petrol-driven cars. So that's another one of these fallacies that we're being goaded into believing, which actually, when you sort of look into more detail, you realize that it's really much the same story being presented a different way, which may be some sort of cue up for what you're about to say for Mr. Sunk's opposition.
Yeah, before we go to Mr. Sunk's opposition, there are a couple of points that I kind of want to pick up on that one too, because
Go for it.
you know, around the same time, there was quite a lot of publicity flying around social media, particularly about this this problem of Tesla and the electric cars generally, to do with lithium mining, which of course takes place many thousands of miles away from any civilized place, and so it doesn't really matter what happens there. And the rather prodigious quantities of diesel that are used in the mining process, which makes absolute porridge of any claim that these things are environmentally sound. And the only thing, as far as I can see, that people, the main reason, I mean, I think it's a massive cash grab, to be honest, a massive wealth grab. Again, and particularly the other thing that did catch my eye, because I am in the position of driving, oh my God, how dare I even admit it? I've said this before. I drive an older diesel car into London.
How dare you, bro?
Yeah,
How can you go online and say these things?
I know I can't. I'm, you know, I'm mea culpa. I'm throwing myself at the mercy of the listeners here, but I can't afford a new one. Goodness sake, you know what do you think I am?
Right.
As we all know, money doesn't grow on trees, or does it?
Well,
But
maybe it does.
the other thing that did sort of rattle my cage a bit was that the new thing about the ULEZ. Have you picked up anything about that? And people are actually out on the streets destroying the cameras. ULEZ is the ultra low emission zone in London. It's been expanded to pretty much everything inside the M25, as far as I can gather. And people are actually literally destroying cameras in their localities because it means that, you know, they can't even take their car and go down to the supermarket for a stock up without getting done by one of these things, you know, in their own neighborhood, and are charged something like, I don't know, it's £12.50 or something every time they do it. And so people are understandably up in arms about it. And the other guy with a name, Mayor of London, can't remember his name, Sadiq Khan,
I think is
also caught out lying about the reason for doing this, and really you know, brutally exposed actually in one program that I saw, for the fact that he had been completely misquoting the figures, which suggested that something like 4,000 deaths within the last year had occurred on, you know, directly due to you know, air pollution, air quality, or poor air quality due to traffic. And it turns out that the real number is one. And, you know, one death too many, maybe, but you know, you probably stand more chance of getting run over by a bus or zapped by a harp weapon or something like that than you do, you know, dying from emissions. And I think that it's just when you consider, and the thing is, I've been driving into London now for, I don't know how long it is, must be about 10 years.
Centuries, I think, bro, isn't it?
Sorry?
Centuries, I think.
Centuries, yeah, maybe. Well, probably decades, but in the way I'm doing now, because I don't, well, I have to say this again, and I'm not going to be popular maybe, but there are very good reasons for it. I don't like trains, apart from the fact they don't work. I have to share the space with quite a lot of people that I would rather not be close to. So I don't do that, and I do use my car, and I pay. But the thing is, have I noticed any reduction in traffic in London? Absolutely not. So it seems that everybody's actually paying this stuff. And the city's coffers must be swollen to bloating, because it hasn't made any difference as far as I can see to any of the things they're telling us they're doing it for. So why are they doing it? Well, fairly obviously, because it's a massive cash cow. And I think, interestingly enough, in Cambridge, city where I live, they've actually just dropped the plan to bring in a congestion charge here, which everybody's super pleased about, of course. And of course, none of the people, this is the thing, Rishi is right. Nobody wants this to happen. Nobody wants to be limited in these ways. Nobody wants to have those freedoms taken away from us. Now, of course, you can persuade people who don't want to have freedom taken away that they will die if they don't, which is what they're doing, global warming, etc. But, he's absolutely right. We don't want it. Nobody wants it. Nobody wants it on the local basis here. Nobody wants it in London. Everybody's up in arms about it. Finally, the British people are showing signs of having some testicles and getting up and saying no, which I think is a really good thing. So that was my sort of wild card there. Okay. Do you want to come back on that one?
I do, yeah. I know where we're going on the next piece, so we'll just hang for a second. First of all, there's some fairly controversial statements that just got thrown out there, and we have to be super careful because, of course, at least half the population do not have testicles, bro. So we just want to make that very clear that this is not a gender specific.
Well, we can have I think we can have energetic testicles, bro.
Yeah, well, that's very true.
I can have
before, but that's a whole other story for another time, regardless of which gender you're actually born into. But I do believe that you're referring to the Labour mayor of London, whose name is Mr. Sadist Cancan. And he is a Labour mayor, following on from our good old friend Mr. Blojo, who was, I think, the previous mayor, who was Conservative. Yeah. So we've got a very interesting situation because London generally sort of always has, I think, a more conservative energy to it because of its banking capitalist nature. So to have a Labour mayor seems like an unusual thing, but there is some history here that goes back to the days of Mr. Livingston, who probably was one of the better mayors that London has seen, who actually genuinely cared about the city. Whereas I'd say our friend Mr. Sadist probably doesn't. He's got quite an odious energy, that individual. Let's just leave it at that. And yeah, I mean, you know what, the comment about trains, I've always loved trains personally, but I think in the modern era, particularly since the last 3 years, the ideas of being sort of shut into trains and planes, crowded spaces with the so-called shedding phenomenon, whatever you understand that to be, has become a more, I have to say, dangerous enterprise. And I totally concur these days with the joys of traveling either with yourself or your partner in your own mobile, because it's a lot safer and you don't have to spend as long energetically cleaning yourself afterwards, which is something that certainly I know we both do a lot of, and most of our listeners probably do too. So yeah, I mean, what do we make of all of this in the end, really? I think that we're being sold a load of horse shit as usual. And there's lots of narratives that are sort of undoing themselves. And I think the trick to all of this is just to watch it all with the sort of sly, wry grin on your faces. So look at these idiots sort of tangling themselves up in knots, trying to convince us of one story with one hand, and on the other hand, almost undoing their own stories by saying, well, it does matter, but it doesn't really matter because I know that it's going to upset everybody. So what's more important, that I do or I don't upset people, or the world ends? Well, if the world was truly ending, and I think this is something that's come up a lot for me over the last week or two, is going back to 2020, which I know probably for most people has now been deleted somehow from their memories, or they've tried to delete it themselves, and remembering what happened at the beginning of the so-called outbreak and some of the narratives that were presented at that point, which just simply didn't stack up. The discussions about hospitals being overrun, and there literally being no footage or evidence of that at all. And I kind of think that one of the interesting things to think about here is, when we're being presented with stories, do they have the human touch to them? Do they feel like human responses? And I think this is really important because, you know, if we think back to 2020, when all of this situation was supposedly unfolding and, you know, the health services were being overrun, I remember thinking to myself, and I may even have said to you at the time, actually, surely if this was real, there would be lots of mobile footage, people on their mobile phones down at the health centers, seeing people being wheeled in terrible states, my family member, my grandfather, my mother, blah, 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 you know, and there'll be chaos outside all of these establishments. And I don't remember seeing one video at all. In fact, there was a number of brave individuals who tried to go down and investigate, and actually their footage showed that they were completely empty, which is not that much of a surprise to any of us who were feeling into what was going on. So I think this is an interesting point. about where we're at, and do things look and feel human, or do they look and feel like something else that's being constructed? Right. So what do you think about that, dude?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm looking at this whole scenario at the moment and thinking this is planned down to the last detail. And I think the narratives are being constructed.
Right.
And I think there's a certain amount of forward planning goes into that. And then I think there are also contingency decisions that are taken to sort of steer things in certain circumstances as well. And that brings me to the next thing that I did cotton on to, which is the ascendancy of Buzz Lightyear.
Oh yes, Mr.
Course, which is
Squarejaw.
our friend Mr. Steer Karma, who we've
Hmm.
dubbed Buzz Lightyear. For I think when I say that, actually, people really get it. So I think we're going to stick with Buzz Lightyear.
Yeah, I
Anyway,
think.
Buzz has, of course, hit the newspapers just yesterday for making some comment to the effect that he doesn't want to separate too far or go too far away from European standards on food quality and health and safety. And immediately there was a media storm accusing him of rowing back on Brexit or betraying Brexit. And he's, of course, on record as saying he will never do that. He will never go back on Brexit. But here he is saying, well, actually, Europe have got the right idea and we really want to stay in with them, guys, don't we? And I think I sort of looked at it and I thought, there's a real clever story going on here. The media are actually now trying to inflame everybody in terms of, claiming that he's going to spoil our lovely Brexit. But of course, they know that now the balance of people who want Brexit versus people who didn't has radically altered in the intervening years since the referendum. And they know perfectly well that if they put it to a referendum tomorrow, we'd be back in Europe before you could blink. So I think what they've done is they've taken this fairly innocent and probably quite boring statement of Keir Starmer's, and they've said, "Oh, I'll tell you what, we could really do something with this. It's headline news. We'll create a big banner. We'll get everybody involved, and what we'll be doing is advertising the fact that Keir Starmer is a Europhile, and therefore all the people who didn't want to leave the European Union, who now want us back in there, are going to vote for him because they think that he's the guy who's going to take us back into Brexit now, out of Brexit, sorry, back into Europe." So, I mean, this is just my fantasy, a big fantasy that blew up as soon as I saw these headlines, and I thought, well, that would kind of fit in a way because I think Sunak is sunk. He is Mr. Rishi Sunk now. I think he's on the way out. I think he's got very little credibility. He was completely destroyed by Owen Jones in a fairly prominent television interview. I don't know whether you saw that. I mean, he was basically exposed for being even more of a liar than Boris Johnson. How is that possible? I don't know. But the whole thing is looking like they're out. We've got the new guy lined up. He's waiting in the wings there. He's looking brand spanking new and sparkling. We're doing a little bit of photoshopping on him to make him look slightly younger than he really is. He looks handsome. He looks dashing. He looks like a man who can do the business. And hey, hey guys, on the side, he actually quite likes Europe. So I think this is going to get him a lot of votes. That's my fantasy. I think the next election will be a landslide for Starmer unless something intervenes in the meantime. My prediction.
Okay, so quite a lot to chew on there, and again, I'm going to come back to my hypothesis about all of this. So this is just a performance; it's a narrative, and I'm going to go on a bit of a limb here and try and say this in the nicest possible way, so I don't upset too many people. But I have lost complete faith in the democratic system. I don't believe it's real, and I think the illusion of choice is really just an illusion, and that what we see with the likes of Ms. Trust, who, by the way, is also back in the news because she feels like she should be the next PM again. And there are some people who seem to think this is a credible idea, and maybe compared to the alternatives, it is. But I feel that what we're just watching is a series of narratives that have been pre-constructed, being played out, and there really is no story here. There isn't a genuineness to anything, which is why I introduced the piece earlier about, does it feel real or does it feel constructed? And I'm basing some of this on my own feelings over the last few years, particularly since the beginning of 2020, and feeling into everything that's been going on. And we are going to talk a little bit about a medicine later that helps you to not only feel, but to see. The Sacred Fungi has been my medicine for a long time, as I think it has with you too. And that has enabled me to ask questions in the other dimensional realms and to see things. And to see whether they feel real or not. But I also based this on an interesting interview, and I can't remember who it was I saw now, who was investigating the whole Jeffrey Epstein piece. In fact, the guy was a hedge fund expert, and he was questioning the veracity of Epstein's hedge fund background. And he basically put forward an idea that Mr. Epstein was never a real person. He was a constructed person, because the way that he behaved when people talked about his hedge funds was simply not credible. It didn't suggest in any way that this guy was really what he said he was. And it seems actually even more so that there was no traceable evidence of any trading that this guy did with his hedge fund. So basically a made up person. So this really got me thinking a lot about who is real and who is made up. Now, this has long been a topic of discussion in some of the rabbit hole conspiracy theorist groups across the planet. Are there clones? Are there actors? And of course, I think we've discussed this before, even with the current head of administration in the US. I'm not going to mention any names, trying to be super careful about that, because we're also very aware that the internet is very much under scrutiny at the moment. And we have to be very, very careful on this channel because people's posts are disappearing sort of posthumously, we could say, because they have content that somebody somewhere doesn't like, particularly if it's criticizing certain types of technology. So just trying to dance around the topic a little bit there. So I wonder about all of this. I'm not a fan of any of these characters. I've totally lost pretty much all interest in British politics because it just doesn't feel real. It feels like we're sort of shunted from one showpiece performance to another. And, you know, we've had a series of fairly laughable prime ministers. I mean, in fairness to our friend, Mr. Blojo, he at least was humorous. His unending ability to lie about pretty much everything in the end did become something of a trademark humor piece, certainly for us. And I know we're both disappointed that he somewhat had to exit the scene, but I'm sure he'll be back in his own inimitable style. And so I just wonder about all of this, dude. I just sort of, you know, I have perhaps the privilege now of being the other side of the pond and looking at British politics from a slightly different perspective, but also having the option to look at what's going on this side of the pond. And the big news this side of the pond at the moment in America is that a handful of mostly, I think, if not exclusively, Republican congressmen are basically preventing any bills being passed in the House of Representatives, which is currently under the stewardship of Mr. McCarthy, Kevin McCarthy. And this is why I think it's interesting, because it sort of throws a stark contrast to what's been going on in Britain. And again, I question how real all of it is and who's working for who. But there seems to be an actual democratic process here, which has enabled 6 to 10 very smart individuals to work out that they hold the balance of power, because the majority between the two parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, in the House of Representatives is very finely balanced, as it is indeed in the Senate. And so what they're doing is they're holding up all of the spending on all of the bills that the government needs to basically fund itself in the US. And one of the major reasons for this is the inordinate and ludicrous amount of money that has been pumped from this side of the pond into Europe, particularly our friend Mr. Voldemort, who's been engaged in a sort of long-standing feud with the chap in Russia. And it seems that that much as our boys in Britain want to be a part of the EU, it seems everybody else in the EU is about to stab each other in the back, and that the war in Eastern Europe at the moment is about to collapse, because people who are very staunch supporters of Mr. Voldemort and his crusade against the Russians, etc., seem to be exiting very quickly a stage left. Poland, Slovakia particularly have been in the news this week because they don't like the fact that they were being flooded with cheap Ukrainian grain. And so now Poland has decided it's not going to send any more weapons into the meat grinder, and instead they're going to build weapons for themselves, presumably because they feel that they're next in line for, again, a narrative which perhaps is one that's being promulgated by the West, but perhaps really is based on nothing. Sort of people suggesting that Russia wants to take over the world and invade all of Europe, and there's absolutely really no evidence to support that other than Western propaganda, which is something that we've become very used to in Britain and Europe over the last sort of 80 years since the First World War, really, I guess. And so all of this is a big performance. And I guess in some ways that leads me into a piece I only want to touch on briefly because it is very divisive, but this idea of which brand are you, and what are you presenting? And are you, on the one hand, presenting a brand that says that you're this kind of individual, but then jumping onto your channel and presenting another brand that says you're actually with us, you're one of us, and you're really, really a good guy, even though you might have been offering your assistance naked to people like Mr. Savile, who of course, we all know is an incredibly nice character, very embedded at the BBC and the royal family.
Jim,
and
excellent.
I'm wondering, I'm trying to be as humorous and delicate about this as possible, but some things just don't add up for me. And I've been somewhat surprised at the level of support that people with a very big brand awareness in the on the TV at the moment have sort of been pulled away from what are very obviously, how to say, lowbrow activities that individuals themselves have said that they have engaged in openly and repeatedly. And I'm like, so just because you've jumped ship onto the alternative media and presented yourself in a new way as a sort of a guru and everything else, that somehow makes all of your previous pretty subversive activity and lowbrow stuff, including Saxgate, which I know is something that we talked about before, somehow okay. And I'm like, I feel quite uncomfortable about a lot of this. So in the nicest possible way, bro, do you have anything to say about that?
Well, I mean, first of all, just to loop back to your comments about UK politics, yeah, of course, it's a complete farce. And I'm sorry if I bored you. I see you've lost interest in these guys. I'm not really interested in them either. I am kind of interested in the sideshow, if you like, but I do regard it as a sideshow because I've got much more important and interesting things to do. But I just can't. I watch with fascination, I guess, in terms of the fact that a lot of people out there are completely hypnotized by it. And I try, and as you know, and we do on these programs, we try to see the light side, but also sort of delve behind the circuit board a little bit and try and find out who's doing the wiring. So with the branding incident, I mean, I think branding is super important in this day and age. I mean, I'm always getting people emailing me saying, your branding could be improved. So I guess that he's done a good job, this individual, on himself, and he's got a few allies. He talks to the right people on his chat shows. He's had a few heavyweights. He got him into bed with Wim Hof. Wim Hof is super popular at the moment for the whole sort of ice bath, cryotherapy thing. And I have to say, he's got a point. I mean, naturopathically speaking, his therapies, I think, are very powerful. But he's got into that. Every second video that he puts out now, he's wearing his underpants and dunking himself in ice cold water. As far as I can see, he's talking to all sorts of interesting people, like he was talking to Graham Hancock a little while ago, and he sort of makes a I know what you think about Mr. Hancock, but it was an interesting show, and I think this is the problem, isn't it? We'll hook you in because we're giving you something that you want to know about. We're giving you something that you're interested in. We're giving you something that's relevant. And so I must be on the right side. I must be, saying something good because I'm here with all of these good people and giving out this really beneficial information. Now, who I am and what I am behind all of that is a completely different matter. I think there are a lot of magicians around. Magic is a big brand at the moment, actually. And I think that says it all, really.
Yeah, I agree with you, bro. And it's it's not that I find the British politics boring. I think that we're taking an alternative look at things, and I do the same here on this side of the pond. And there's a bit of me that always hopes that somehow it's going to play out the way that we all want. But there's a big bit of me that has a big red flag over pretty much everything, and everyone who's a part of that machine. And I sort of bounced, as at various points between sort of hoping for the best and thinking that people this side of the pond maybe are going to change things, and then wondering whether some of those individuals who seemingly are also up on similar charges as the individual we're talking about in Britain, I'm like, and that the fact that those two align with each other. And I do think it's interesting that there are lots of dots that join these various people, like Mr. Savile and these characters, that goes all the way up to hashtag not my king and all of that kind of stuff. And I'm just like, what is it that's being pointed to here? This is a big theme that I always like to say. What is it that we're being pointed towards with all of this? this, and
Yeah.
is it the outing of the magicians? And of course, the brand awareness project was also in a deep conversation with a guy that I've generally liked, but now I have some, I'm not so sure, given some of the recent support is the journalist on this side, Mr. Carlson, who is quite closely aligned to the ex-president. And so I'm just like, I don't know what to think about all of this. There was a very timely interview that was done literally the week before all of this news came out, which makes me feel a little suspicious that it was either a preemptive support garnering, or that there was some more collusion behind the scenes. And of course, from what I understand, the investigation itself had been going on for at least a couple of years. And so it should really not have come to any surprise to the individuals that this was going to come out. And certainly from some of my contacts inside the world of British mainstream press, they were being told quite some time ahead to be prepared for the weekend that it all came out, because it was going to kick off. So I kind of think that, we're being shown perhaps, and of course, Mr. Carlson himself, if you haven't seen it, did a pretty crazy interview with a guy that had some pretty interesting information about the former president of the US, who, of course, many people would suggest has also been a big magician behind the scenes, and who won awards for peace, despite being at war with pretty much the entire world during this entire time as the president of the US. So the more that we take a step back and look at all of this, the more that we see and smell a big stinking heap of horseshit, I think. And I know we say this on pretty much every show, but it is what we're trying to point towards, which is how much of any of this is actually believable if you just spend a few minutes scratching the surface of all of it. And to come back to the original sort of point is how do we feel about this, and which branding are we believing, and should we believe any of it? And is it more important that we come back to what brand are we putting out in the world ourselves? Are we putting out a brand of untruths and half-truths and sharing information that we believe to be true but actually have no evidence of at all? Or are we just perhaps doing what we try to do, which is take a sidelong look at things and say we're not really sure about any of this, but we're going to have a bit of fun with it anyway, and try and point towards that most of it doesn't really feel or even look believable.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, I just want to say about that. I mean, you use the word evidence, which is like a red rag to a bull for me. Because my profession is absolutely littered with, with accusations of not having any evidence, despite the fact that, I watch people get better through doing what I do every day. I haven't got any evidence because it's not conducted in the right way. But the thing about evidence is, and it was, I had a massive row on social media over the last couple of days with somebody who was demanding that I give evidence for some of the things that I was talking about. And I said, well, that's not really the point. I'm talking about this because this is like there's a role for polemic, there's a role for ranting, there's a role for spilling, and just kind of getting people engaged with something. I don't know what's going on, but hey guys, something's going on. We owe it to ourselves to at least talk about it, don't we? And the demand for evidence is circular always, because it rather than getting on with what's important, it involves trawling through minutiae. It involves verifying things, and it's the whole sort of scientific process. And I'm not saying that science is not worth anything. I'm not saying that forensic focus is not worth anything. I'm saying that there are much more interesting things to do, and we're running out of time. So what I'm saying basically is that we need to be looking at a different kind of evidence. And I think that what we were saying, I don't know whether we were saying it on air, I've lost track now, or whether we were saying it before we went on air, which was that we need to be, I think you said it actually, trying to determine whether something has like a human feel to it. What does this feel like? That's the kind of evidence that I'm interested in. If you check in with yourself, if you check in with your heart, for example, what's it saying about this individual? What's it saying about this story? And I think that the other thing that we've sort of got going on at the moment is the whole tech thing, which we were talking about as well, and how they seem to have ramped up the sort of surveillance through technology, and just lately, and people are now sort of getting deplatformed for things that they said ages ago that are no longer even relevant, but might be contrary to their narrative. So my answer to that is actually, okay, so if they can take tech away from us at any time. They've got the capacity. They could switch the whole lot off tomorrow, so we can't rely on that. We have to develop our telepathy. We have to develop our second sight. We have to develop our remote viewing and all of that stuff, which I know is something that's very close to your heart, bro.
It is, and I'm going to take a couple of minutes just towards the end as we sort of have rattled through our allotted time for today's show. But yeah, you know, I think this is a really important point, and I think this is the point I would always like to lead people to is, you know, we can sit and watch all kinds of things on our screen, and I don't know about you, but I get emails every day about artificially created footage, artwork, editorials, and basically it seems that the computer can pretty much do any of your creativity for you now, which not surprisingly, lots of people have jumped on because it's saving them a lot of time. However, it does sort of make you wonder, and there have even been people going out there talking about this recently in terms of spiritual content that's being put out. So when people are sharing their spiritual content, is it really theirs from their experiences? Is it something that they'd read in a book, perhaps? You know, that's how things used to be sometimes. Or is it something that a machine has understood from its interactions with humans and has decided to put out on behalf of humans? And I think this is really where the shift, the bifurcation point that's been talked about a lot, is starting, for me anyway, to become very, very obvious. And hopefully it's becoming more and more obvious audience and listeners too, which is why we're going to spend the last few minutes talking a little bit about a medicine that is very dear to my heart, which is the sacred fungi, and also another plant or family of plants, the Artemisias, but particularly Lady Mugwort, Artemisia vulgaris, who in conjunction with sacred fungi, which is really how I learned to do a lot of what I do, takes us really into what you can say is the astral space, or the 4D human emotional realm, which is where we can confront a lot of our own unresolved emotional stuff. But having done that, and sometimes also combining with another favorite plant, the beautiful Santa Maria, which gives us a more sort of 5D non-dual perspective to which we can view ourselves, but also the world around us, gives us the ability to be somewhat conscious multidimensionally in 3D, 4D, and 5D simultaneously, which the more you do that, it becomes a natural occurrence. We're not always necessarily needing the medicine to do it. And this is where I generally try to put my attention when trying to understand what is going on. And it doesn't always mean that we get it completely right. But when I'm looking at news stories and individuals on the news, without obviously psychically trespassing, I do sort of take an energetic hit reading of how a situation feels, rather than listening to the words or watching people's hands as they're trying to spell us by looking deeply into our eyes, which is what some individuals, if you watch carefully, do quite a bit on their videos. And I'm like, you know, as somebody who has, I would say, a fair grasp of the idea of manifestation and magic, to see other individuals doing it, I would say more openly and perhaps a little more clumsily than previously was possible, to me suggests that the protection that many of these individuals enjoyed, particularly in the mainstream Hollywood, etc., has gone. And, you know, we were talking a little bit off camera about the idea of handlers. Maybe that's a bigger conversation for another time, but it's becoming more obvious that where there was a protection and an encouragement for handlers and some of these individuals, that protection is now gone. And I feel like some of them are scrambling to try and find a new home where they might feel some level of protection from the masses. But I also have to question some of the numbers that I see on some individuals' channels, because we do know, you know, from many different sources, that numbers can be artificially inflated by the use of bots. And, you know, if we're getting emails every day saying that, hey, we can produce your content for you without you really having to do anything, it makes me wonder how many comments are being generated by the same machinery. So it does make me wonder, again, to loop back to the idea of how many individual situations, narratives are just complete constructs that are designed to lead the masses into a place that suits them, whether it's the Marmite environmental situation, whether it's the political narratives that are swapping one individual for another, or whether it's the scrambling as people get outed, particularly male magicians. I would say that, you know, even one of the biggest male magicians stepped down from his media mogul position this week, Mr. Murdoch. I would say is another big individual in that space. And I think we're going to see more of these individuals fall one by one, openly and publicly. But I also feel like the higher forces and Great Spirit want us to make a discernment choice here about what we feel about any of this. And I think that the more we've done Web of Wyrd over the last few years, and certainly talked about all of these things, hopefully our listeners have understood that we're always trying to say, don't believe any of it. Unless you are actually there, and as you said, party to what actually occurred, we can't really be sure about anything anymore. And particularly with the use of photoshopping and artificially created imagery, artwork, and you know, written prose, what can we believe? belief. And I think the only thing we can truly believe is what we experience directly, which is what the Buddhists would call wisdom. You know, that is direct experience of a situation. So I would suggest for those of you brave enough out there, and with Scorpio season upon us, and this Scorpio season particularly looks like it's going to be an interesting one. Many interesting things to come, I think, from pretty much from today onwards. October the 4th is a big date, which many of you may have clocked. We have a new moon on October the 14th, and then we have a big doozy which just so happens to fall on my birthday, October the 28th, which is a full moon eclipse, which is also 3 days before Samhain or Halloween. So we're definitely entering into freaky season, definitely rebirth season, and also you know, Scorpios are known for their ability to see beyond the veil and beyond what is being presented. So I think we all need to enter into Scorpio season being a little bit Scorpio and practicing a high level of discernment. And if we are brave enough to venture into the astral planes with the help of things like sacred fungi, I would definitely suggest at least introducing plants like mugwort, either as an essence or maybe as part of the brew, into the mix, because that is a plant that can very much help us to see, but also protect us from some of the less pleasant energies in the astral plane. So that's my tuppence worth, bro. I know that we're on a little bit of a time limit here, but do you have anything in response you wish to say?
Absolutely. It occurred to me as you were talking that the last thing I want to do when I'm communing with those particular medicines is to look at social media or have anything to do with television or the internet or anything.
Yeah, that's not what
It
I'm
is
saying at
of
all.
no interest whatsoever. You know, there's much more interesting things going on, actually. The second thing I want to say is, yeah, you sort of say, you know, if anybody's brave enough to go there, you need to be sort of correctly hooked up to be able to go there, because as we all know, boys and girls, don't go swallowing unidentified fungi if you don't know what you're doing.
No, absolutely.
It is mushroom season here. It's coming up close to mushroom season here in the UK.
Pretty much bang on, actually. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of excitement about the Liberty caps in particular, and when they're going to start showing themselves. A lot of people I've noticed on Facebook sharing pictures of things that I would like. I just want to scream at them, "Don't eat that."
Yes.
Is this one, and all of that sort of thing. So be very careful, boys and girls, if you're out and about hunting your medicines. I love the stuff, actually. It's been a good ally of mine for a long time. I've perhaps not communed with it as often as I would like lately. And I have to be really careful about what I'm saying here too, because I think some people who follow might sort of get the wrong idea or think I'm promoting things that perhaps I shouldn't be promoting in my position. But it is a medicine. That's the right way to look at it. I don't go along with the kind of recreational use of plants like that or beings like that at all. I think what they've got to show us is far more deep and far more important, and you know, fundamental than the idea of, you know, the tripping as such. And of course those particular beings and the psilocybin species are under considerable amount of scrutiny from a so-called scientific point of view at the moment. A lot of trials happening in London, in some to do with, you know, well, places like Imperial College. I was going to say places with gravitas, but I'm not sure about Imperial
Don't
College.
even get me started.
Clowns, but you know, so-called bastions of the establishment doing trials on entheogenic substances, and some of them are to do with, you know, mental health problems and whether they can help with that. And I think there's been an abundance of evidence to suggest that that is the case over many years now. But some of them are actually I met a guy the other day who'd just been on one of these programs. I would never do one, I have to say, but the program was not to do with mental health at all. It was simply to do with you know, some kind of neurological research or, you know, psychological research, perception or something like that. So it wasn't, you know, these things are actually being looked into in the mainstream. And I think that, you know, we could, on the surface, we could say, oh, that's a good idea, isn't it? You know, we're not allowed to have them still, by the way. They're still illegal here. But you can do it if you're a scientist or if you do a proper research project. If you've ever read Rick Strassman on his you know, his use of, you know, the spirit molecule, have you read that one?
Many moons ago,
yeah, I mean, if you've read that stuff, these trials are horrendous. You know, they take place in really boring and quite frightening environments.
Yeah.
You get spiked and hooked up to all sorts of electronics, and you know the last thing you want when you're actually in that particular space is to have anything to do with that kind of crap, to be honest with you. So what they're doing, I don't know. I don't trust it, but the field, that's a different matter.
Yeah, you know, I mean, just quickly, just to bounce back on some of those things, because I think maybe this is a conversation which we will extend into our next episode, which is probably going to be for Samhain or Halloween, because there's some things we wanted to talk about that upcoming important date. But yeah, I mean, how again, it comes back to the same thing: taking plants into laboratories, stripping them out, giving them to people in very unnatural settings, and being given permission to do that when the rest of the population, in theory, isn't. To me, just seems A, hypocritical, and B, very much not what the medicine is about. And I think that these are, again, you know, very much things that we should be considering at this time. So definitely food for thought on that one. And I definitely concur with everything you just said there, bro. But as we come into the final few moments, I just would like to alert our American or US audience to the fact that myself and my partner Bella are going to be giving our first in-person workshop here in Austin a week tomorrow, in fact, on the 1st of October. Which will be utilizing many of the different quantum aspects of plants that me and you have talked about a lot over the last couple of years, and also sharing how to access some of the spaces that we've just been talking about so that you can become more discerning about what is going on. And I would just also like to say that I do not in any way suggest working with those medicines and jumping onto the internet and trying to look into a computer screen to ascertain what is going on. That's not what I was referring to. I was just suggesting more that we can go into those places.
I didn't think you were, bro. Don't worry.
No, I know you did, but I just want to make that super clear. What I'm suggesting is that you can go into those spaces and ask questions to discern the truth of the much bigger picture. If that's something that interests you, which sometimes for me it is. Sometimes it's about personal work. Sometimes I'm like, I want to know what the hell is going on and where should I be directing my energies, in the best way to help other people who perhaps are struggling with some of the narratives and perhaps caught in some of them a little more than is helpful for them. So busting narratives and dissolving the illusion, I think, is going to be a big part of the next 6 weeks. And for sure, I look forward to doing another episode in the coming weeks about all of this, bro. So final words to you as we wrap up for today.
Yeah, at the risk of self-publicity again, just mentioning the book I've got 2 books coming out actually. One is a rewrite of my previous Iridology book, which is coming out in November. That's all done and dusted. And the next one, which I talked about a little bit earlier, but I just wanted to say that I've just finished today, and I'm feeling really pleased about it. Finished writing a massive chapter on the heart, and so I'm kind of really in that space at the moment, in the sense that the heart is, it's not all about hearts and flowers, if you like, in that way. It is a very, very, it's a sacred space in itself, and I think some of these medicines are very, very powerful ways of getting of accessing that space as well. But you do have to be quite careful. Heart pathology is something still the biggest killer on the planet, in the developed world anyway, and of course the offered medications have targeted, and actually the bioweapon also targeted, the heart. But all I want to say to people is, just look after your hearts. And on the back of that, it is hawthorn berry season in the UK at the moment as well.
Nice. Well, look, and again, Pete, for people who may be listening for the first time, who might be interested to get some of these medicines or get in touch with you, what's your website again, bro?
www.thenaturalcentre.com. www bit is out of date, isn't it? It's https / this, that, and the other, whatever it is. Thenaturalcentre.com.
Perfect. And just I didn't mention it ourselves, but if you are in this part of the US and look forward to learning about quantum plant intelligence, the art or the map to magic and manifestation, which is the workshop, please do go to me and Bella's website, which is quantumplanthealing.com, which is also where you can find many other plant immersions that myself and the brother Pete have worked together on, including the recent Quest of the Quantum Heart and the journey over the Rainbow Bridge, which was really dealing a lot with some of the less helpful energies that have entered our world through the offered medications and various other side effects and all of that. So there are many different ways to journey into the heart space, which, as Pete has just pointed out, is hawthorn season. So great time to go out and make your hawthorn tinctures. And let's not forget that the heart is the organ in the body, which is the direct channel and conduit to our fifth dimensional, non-dualistic, unconditional love parts of ourself, which I think is really where we're all headed to if we're still in the game. So hopefully all of our listeners are. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you, bro, for being an amazing co-host, as always. Please, everybody, enjoy this wonderful Libra Equinox. And hopefully myself and the brother will be back very, very soon to do another edition for the upcoming Samhain festival at the end of October. So keep it real, keep it empty, keep it rainbow, and we'll see you all next time. Ciao for now.